John DeDakis. I'm a manuscript editor, a writing coach, a former editor on CNN's The Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer, and I'm a novelist. You're one to one with me, and I'm one to one with author Stephen Rogers. Steve is a former business executive who, after retiring, made the transition to he's now gliding as a published author and speaker. And so we're going to talk about making this transition from retirement to basically a new career. Steve, welcome to One to One.
Welcome. Thank you. Thanks, John, and thanks for having me.
You're welcome. That's a great microphone you got there.
It's my
But
son-in-law. Yeah.
you don't have a broadcast background though, so you're getting really professional here.
I don't, but my son-in-law set me up so that I could do these things, as he said, in style.
Well, you definitely have style.
Yes.
Tell me more about your pre-novelist life.
Okay. I began my career as an accountant, and worked for one of those giant public accounting firms, and did the accounting career route, and eventually ended up at a huge utility firm called Dominion Energy here in Richmond, Virginia. And I was their corporate controller, and then did a few other things with them. Ran administrative services, did the information technology group, but purely business. I did nothing but business and objective business work when I was out in that part of my career. Well, at the same time, I read a lot, and I love to read and I love fiction, but really it was the best way to say it's a very objective career path I had.
Did you know that you wanted to be a novelist? When did that take root?
Oh boy, probably when I was about 10 years old.
Really?
I just fell in love with the idea of wanting to be a writer. And I never seriously pursued it as a college track or anything like that, but it was always in the back of my mind as I went through the career. And I would dabble, write a few short stories. I actually wrote 90 pages of a novel called The Deal, an Accounting Thriller, when I was, maybe 35 or 40. It's sitting back here in a binder. Terrible. It was awful. But really, I just couldn't dedicate the time I wanted to. So it was there, but I didn't do anything about it.
Now, we met in Pasadena, California
Mhm.
at the Writer's Digest novel writing conference, where I was doing a workshop on, I think, research, write what you don't know, or
Mhm.
how to write what you don't know. And that's where we met. And so at that point, you weren't published. I don't even know if you were retired at that point. Were you retired?
Yes, I was retired at that point. I'd been maybe 2 years out of work at that point.
Okay, so talk about the transition from
Okay.
retiring to getting yourself prepped to write a novel, which is a big undertaking.
Well, what I did was, well, the first thing was that when we decided that I was going to retire, we were driving down the street one day, and my wife leaned forward and turned the radio and said, "What are you going to do with that time?" Uh, and I said, "I want to take a crack at this writing thing." And so one thing I had done is I'd read books like Stephen King's on writing and things like that. And it basically said, you just got to start doing it. So I took a week off, and then I just sat up at a desk and started writing short stories. And so I wrote 3 or 4 short stories for practice with beginning, middle, and end, and that type of thing. And then I just said, I've got to take a crack at a novel. So this was long before you and I met, but I wrote a novel that was a time travel, historical fiction kind of thing. That too is over here in a binder. And I learned from that, number one, how long it takes to write a novel. I had this notion that I would just suck it up and in 4 months a draft would be done, but that's not the way it works for me, at least. And I I learned though that if I put the time in, I could put a long story together. And I knew the story flowed, meaning it had a plot that flowed. I knew the other things I had to work on, things like dialogue and pacing and subplots and that kind of stuff. But I got the right feel for it. And so then the big shift came when we were on a plane going to Israel in, I think it was 2017. And One thing that happened when I started writing was I would ask myself 100 times a day, I wonder what would happen if.
Yeah.
If I saw this or I saw that, and every once in a while I get a short story out of one of those.
Hmm.
So when I was on the plane to Israel, I said, I wonder what would happen if I was an alcoholic who had just been sprung from rehab and I had to take this trip. And my novel came from that. And so when I met you, I had finished the first draft, I think, and I was editing. So we were probably, 2 years out at that point of my retirement.
Well, let's take a look. It's called Into the Room, and tell us a little bit more about it. I can tell you that it's Christian fiction, but it's not preachy. And what I especially liked about it was the fact that the protagonist is, as you say, he's just been sprung from rehab, and I'm not even sure that the rehab has taken a root. And all of a sudden, he's in this tour group through the Holy Land with a group of holy rollers,
Yes.
and so his reaction to them is, I think, entirely believable, and not particularly gracious either. And so you're on thin ice when it comes to the Christian market, because not all of these people are necessarily the greatest ambassadors for Christ, I suppose you could say. And yet, you know, um, you warm up to these characters, you warm up to the protagonist,
Hmm.
plus you really learn a lot about, in a sense, Israel, biblical history, Old Testament, New Testament. So I don't think I've given everything away, but
No, no.
what have I missed that you
Well,
want to add?
well, let me tell you what I did was when I had that thought on the plane, I invented the main character. Well, his name now is Ben Cahill. He had like 5 different names before I settled on that one. And what I did was I journaled in his voice as we saw the different sites in Israel. So we would go to Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls are, and I would journal as if I was him, and then I would write everything the tour guide said down.
Mhm.
And basically, what I did was I transcribed that. I turned that, I should say, not transcribed that. I turned that into the book with the supporting characters and the subplots and all of that. And the idea was, what are I was really working through issues I've had in my life, not me personally, but in observing alcoholism and drug addiction.
Mhm.
And how can I bring this guy through this in a realistic way? And the one thing I really wanted was for him to be a very realistic character that people could relate to. And it's really interesting you mentioned the term holy rollers, because the first line of the book is there's nothing worse than holy rollers on a roll.
Yeah, right.
And
That's a great opening line.
I did have a few people say, "Are you sure you want to put that in there? Because that has a certain connotation with Christians." And I said, "Yes, because at the end, he's going to be on board with them."
Mhm.
But I think it's important to see the viewpoint as people are cynical as they observe and do their thing.
There you go. And let me ask you about this,
Hmm.
in terms of the Christian market
Hmm.
and the expectations. Um, did you encounter any kind of blowback or raised eyebrows about the approach that you've taken?
No, not at all. It's an interesting market, and I actually didn't know there was much of a market. I mean, I knew people wrote Christian books, but it's a huge market. And I mean, there's big conferences and thousands of books are sold, and there's bestsellers and all of that. And the people that read the book for me that were familiar with that genre liked the realism of the book,
Right.
and they liked the realism of the character, and they liked the fact they could relate to. Not everybody's an alcoholic or an addict, but everybody's addicted in some way to something. So they could
Uh-huh.
relate to his struggle and his growth. So it was very open-minded. The people that I worked with, at least at Elk Lake Publishing, and my editor, who is a Christian fiction writer, and she also writes, I think, realistic characters, and so that might be part of it. But it
So now
was
is
wide
is
open.
is this part of your upbringing? I mean, are you actively involved in a church? I mean,
Hmm.
obviously it's always delicate to get involved with,
Right.
spiritual things, but where do you come down on the continuum?
Yeah, I mean, I have a very strong faith. I'm actively involved in a church. My personal view on how to be, for lack of a better word, evangelical is just to try to do my best with my life, and which doesn't always happen because we all fail.
Mhm.
Well, I fail. I shouldn't say we all because I don't want to speak for you. I fail pretty consistently,
Oh, yeah.
um, and I make mistakes a lot. But what I try to do is just try to live the best life I can. And if someone wants to talk to me about my faith, I'm happy to do it. But I do not openly go up to someone and say, "Hey, you need this or you need that," because first off, I don't know what they need. But secondly, I don't think that would be effective.
How were you raised?
I
What
was raised
denomination?
Roman Catholic.
Mhm.
And went to a Catholic college. My wife was raised Roman Catholic. We go to an Episcopal church now, which is, I guess, Roman Catholic light, they call it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think Robin Williams called it, same rituals, not as much guilt.
Yeah, exactly. And, we do that, and both of us, it means a lot to us personally, but I'm very respectful of other people's faith and other people's views on where they are in their journey. And I think that's the way you kinda have to be.
Now, you mentioned evangelicalism, and of course, we
Mhm,
are now living in an age where the evangelicals have, I would argue, and that's been part of my faith experience. I would argue that the evangelicals of today, not all, but many, are almost the modern day Pharisees in the
mm,
way that they have embraced Donald Trump. Now, I know your book doesn't get into politics, but
mhm.
I feel I'm obligated to at least put this on the table in terms of your view of evangelicalism and how it has affected political discourse.
Interesting. I would say that I shouldn't say I would say because I'm saying it. I w I think that anytime someone tries to push any belief on someone else against their will, it's not an effective strategy. So I think if someone's on the extreme of any issue, I'm not sure it's a good thing to be closed-minded enough that you won't hear what someone else's viewpoint is,
Mhm.
or and you won't respect what someone else's viewpoint is. And I tend to keep my faith and my politics completely separate because I believe they're two different things. I mean,
Mhm.
I'm sure that I vote sometimes based on what my faith says to me,
Mhm.
but I'm also my whole view is I've got enough problems without worrying about yours. And I don't know if that really answers your question, but
Well,
I
it
don't,
does. It
I
does.
don't get too wrapped up in that side of it because of what you're saying. I don't like to waste time on things that won't work.
Right.
And so even if and believe before I say this, I want to preface it.
Mhm.
I don't believe this is my job. Okay. But
Mhm.
even if I believed it was my job to walk out to every single person and say, you should be a Christian and follow my faith,
Mhm.
I would not do that because I don't think it would work. It just,
Uh-huh. Well, you've
one thing you learn
probably
in the
been
business world.
yeah, you've probably been on the receiving end of a lot of
Oh,
that,
sure.
and it
Yeah.
just, there are effective ways to talk with someone
Right.
on an in-depth basis, and, usually using God as a cudgel is not the most effective.
And a good analogy is being a parent because my kids can watch the way I live and what I say and what I do, and maybe that'll make an impression. If I tell them how to live and what to say and what to do, even I mean, they're all grown, but probably even now, it's not gonna resonate. So that's
Right.
kind of the way I approach it.
Let's talk a little bit more about the process of writing.
Mhm.
You've got one book in the can, more in the process, and we'll talk about that. So, what are some of the main lessons that you learned along the way that uh,
Mhm.
that greased the skids toward getting published?
Well, I think the main one was you've just gotta practice. Practice, practice, practice. You can go to conferences and you can go to workshops, and it'll set you up and make you think about things, but you're not well, I'm not gonna get better unless I put words on paper and then am honest with my critique of them. And so I think that's the first thing is just it's all practice. And I also believe that it's very, very important to be thick-skinned when you ask people for input, because and you have to take input with a grain of salt. Uh, and I'll give you a great example. With my first novel, the one that's not published, there was one 5-page section where one beta reader said to me, "I don't think you were comfortable writing that day." And another beta reader said, "I think you found your voice right here." And it was the same 5 pages.
Wow.
So you have to trust yourself a little bit. And I think in the end, the thing I've learned, excuse me, the most was write what I want to write, because not everyone's going to like what I want to write or what I write. And so I need to be comfortable with what I'm writing.
Of those two beta readers, which one nailed it? Was that a good day, or was that when you found your voice?
I believe it was when I found my voice in
Uh-huh.
that book. Because when I went back and read this was probably 50 pages into a 250 page book. The stuff before that needed to be completely revised to get the tone consistent with from that point forward. But
Okay.
then the rule I have, though, is if I hear the same thing from two different people, I will absolutely make a change. If it would, no matter what it is, I'll give you an example. In that first book, I had a very subtle sex scene. Basically, I said the guy lost his virginity, and both people said, "You don't need that. It doesn't fit what's going on in this scene. Just have him kiss her, and then they have a relationship that starts." And I argued with both of them, and then I finally said, if two people are saying it, they must be right. So I just changed it.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's all very subjective. And
It
so
is.
talk more about beta readers.
Mhm.
What are they? How have you found them? And how have those people helped?
Oh
You've
boy,
sort of
they're
you've
wonderful.
alluded to that a little bit,
Yep.
but I think a lot of people have trouble finding the right connections.
But all of my beta readers are people that are I would say close friends of mine. And my final beta reader is my wife, but we can talk about that separate because she's what I call the red pen of doom. Um, so she's lovingly vicious when she reads my work. I won't give her anything until it's been through about 50 people.
Really?
But I picked my beta readers because of what I understood to be their skill sets. Like one of my friends is a tremendous editor, and he loves beta reading. And what he will do is actually give me typewritten pages of comments and typos, and he'll pick up inconsistencies hundreds of pages apart. He's just wonderful.
Yeah.
Another one of mine is a woman I used to work with who reads 250 books a year. So I wanted her to read it just to, is it flat? Does it flow? Does the story hold you? Another one is just my best friend who doesn't read a lot, but he knows me well. So he'll read. So I've picked 5 or 6 people that I just trust to read and give me honest input. And so they'll give me input back, and then I'll decide what I'm going to do.
And you don't have to pay these people either.
No, I take them to lunch or to dinner or whatever, but they don't require that. But you don't have to pay them, and most of them are very honored, I guess, to be asked. And for the second book, I've met up with a couple of people who I didn't know were into the Christian fiction genre, and they'll probably read this one for me too.
On the screen, it says that you stood next to Bill Clinton as the former president shaved in a public restroom. That's part of your bio. And of course, I don't know the story, but I'm dying to know.
Well,
What happened?
it's a fascinating story because back when I was the corporate controller, so this is after he was president. So this must have been the early 2000s sometime.
He was out of office at this point, or
He was
no?
out of office. And when I was a corporate controller, occasionally they would bring me to investor conferences because there was an accounting issue that was hot and they wanted someone to answer questions from investors. So when you get to do that, at least I did, I got to go in a private jet with the CEO and an investor relations guy, which is a tremendous. My first 100 million, I'm buying a jet. I just want to be very clear. But they're wonderful things. But anyways,
Don't get your hopes up here.
no,
Dave.
I'm not getting my hopes up. So we were in the hangar where the jet landed, and we went into the restroom, and I'm standing there at the restroom, and I look over to my right, and there's this man shaving, and I said, "That looks like Bill Clinton." And he was shaving with a portable razor, and and I'm not one who really understands clothing, but it was the most beautiful suit I've ever seen. I mean, it should be. That's not a criticism. He's a
Sure.
president. He should have the most beautiful suit I've
But
ever seen.
he had shaving cream on his face.
He had shaving cream on his face, and he was shaving. And it turns out, so we could probably peg the year. It was when Gray Davis was running for governor.
Okay.
And he was out to campaign for Gray Davis. And so he was just chatting away with the Secret Service agent that was there. And I went outside and I asked the Secret Service agent who was outside that there was another one outside the door. I said, "That's who I thought it was." And they're not supposed to respond, because theoretically
Sure.
you're distracting them. But
Yeah.
I must have looked pretty benign. He said, "Yeah, that's him."
So
I read.
you didn't strike up a conversation with him?
No, I did not. He was very focused, and I ran outside and called my dad and said, "You're not going to believe this." It was pretty funny. Yeah,
Okay.
I was actually starstruck.
Really? I mean, did it have any kind of a long-term effect on you?
Well, yeah. I mean, I've seen people with executive presence. Okay, this guy oozed, and I mean this. This is not a negative. I mean this is a positive. He oozed executive presence. He just
What is
had.
that? What is that?
He had such a charisma and authority air about him. It was just amazing. It really was.
Do you think it's studied or is it just innate?
I think people have it innately. I think they might perfect it as they work as leaders, but I think some people are born leaders, and I think he probably is.
Well, and you've given some thought to leadership. Is this something that you consciously try to apply to your own life, to your own, novel writing author life?
Yeah, I try to apply it to my writing life in the sense that when I'm with other authors, I try to be encouraging and available whenever I can help. I mean, I'm not a major author, so I don't know how much I can help somebody, but I'll help them as much as I can. And if there's a group, I try to be a leader. Now, outside of my writing world, the two things I do now is I write and speak, and I do nonprofit work. I always want to be a leader in a nonprofit, chair of the board or whatever, because I think it's where I can help the most, given my experience and background.
I want to talk about marketing in a minute, but
Mhm.
we were talking about process, and you were talking about short stories, and you have a short story that's going to be published next year in an anthology.
Mhm.
And tell the story of how that came about, because I think it's relevant to the whole
Yeah.
idea of process.
It's really fascinating because one of the things someone told me early on was subscribe to Writer's Digest. So I did, and they have great articles, but they also, every month there's a contest, and it alternates. One month there's a picture, and it says, write a 600-word short story about this picture and submit it. And one of them, there's a picture, and it say, write the first line of a short story or novel about the picture and submit it. So there was a picture of this little boy in overalls holding a batch of yellow flowers one month. And so I wrote a little 600-word short story. I sent it into the contest, but it didn't win. But I had it saved, and it was really good practice to write the short story. And no matter how long my short stories are, you know how some short stories kind of end and you're wondering what the heck happened? What's
Oh,
going
yeah.
to happen? I always have an end. So I had
Uh-huh.
the end, and it was concluded. And then, I don't know, maybe a month ago, I was on Twitter, and I saw this Willow and Thorn at Juliet Willows is a person I follow on Twitter, and she said submissions are due today if you want to be considered for the New Beginnings anthology. So I said, what the heck? I remember that short story, and I cleaned it up a little bit, and I sent it up, and 3 days later they said they'd like to publish it in the anthology. And it's not short stories are not a financial thing; they're a writing credit thing, and they're a good validation thing because if someone else likes your writing, well, let me rephrase that. If someone else likes my writing, it pushes me to keep going.
Right,
Because
right.
it can be isolating. Writing can be isolating. And,
Exactly. And
yeah.
and writing is good practice. Writing short
Yep.
stories is good practice.
I think it's a ball. I think it's really fun.
So talk more about the marketing side of
Mhm.
things, because one of my surprises is that marketing was it's required, really.
Yep.
No matter if you've got to deal with a major publishing house or if you're self-published or a small
Right.
indie or whatever. And I think that that's a big surprise to a lot of wannabe authors. Was it a surprise for you?
Oh,
And
absolutely.
and then how have you been able to do it?
Yep. It was incredible. I shouldn't say an incredible surprise. I knew I'd be marketing. I have what I guess you'd call it a small indie publisher, and she actually pays a higher royalty because she knows so much of the marketing falls on the authors. And so, I did a lot of research on the internet and talked to authors and talked to other people who have done marketing about how I could approach this. And then what I try to do, I experimented, I guess is the best way to put it. I do the social media. I didn't do social media. As a matter of fact, you recommended this book, Social Media for Dummies, for me. And I do social media, and that helps. But what I really do is I try to make contacts with bloggers, newspapers, radio stations, anybody I can, and I try to make 5 contacts a week. I explain who I am, what my book is, and then it's a little bit like the old telemarketing days. And so maybe 1 in 10, I'll get a hit and I'll get an interview or whatever, or a review.
That's got to be really tedious, though.
It is, but it's tedious. But I just put aside, and it takes an hour to find 5. Well, it takes longer now because I've been doing it for a year and a half on this one book. But it's tedious, but I think it's necessary. And I really focused locally on getting speaking engagements. And I've done retiree groups for my former company because my company is a huge company. They have retiree groups all over the area, and they took me right away. So if you have large companies with retirement groups, they're always looking for speakers. A lot of book studies, book groups that I knew were interested, and some of them were faith-based, some of them weren't. Kiwanis clubs were interested, and I just keep trying. And then from one speaking engagement, you may get another because someone say, hey, this might be good for X. And you just say, I'm available. And you give them a business card and see where it goes. And that's what I do. And it's fun to do. Now I have the one other really interesting venue, which is groups that are traveling to Israel. And there's the guy in town who organized the group we took. When he's taking a group, I will go during one of his prep classes and explain my book, and some of them will want my book as part of that too. And then I do a thing where I on my website you can go and find the book, or I'll mail you an autographed copy. I try everything.
Well,
the one thing I would tell you, the one thing I did do that didn't work was a local church had a golf tournament. So me and my buddy decided that I would sponsor a hole at the golf tournament. So my book would be there on the hole, and then I donated 4 books to go to the last place team because I'm such a lousy golfer. And I don't think that resulted in anything. So that was not an effective strategy, but it was worth a try.
Yeah. Well, and there's your website on the screen, Stephen-Rogers.com. And people can also contact you through your through your email, which is rogersstephen334@gmail.com. So 334, you were born in March of 1934, correct?
Actually, well, it's funny because if anyone ever tried to hack me, because I grew up in Boston, my favorite athlete of all time was Larry Bird. So I always use 33, and then I just hit the 4. There is a thing I did forget to mention in the writing journey part.
Okay.
In the process, which was when I met you, I got the professional help through you as a writing coach. And you can get that a number of ways. You can go to school for it. You can do writing groups. But with me and you, it was a big difference. And so, I mean, obviously I'd recommend you, but I would recommend a writing coach to the people that can afford it, because it gets you that one-on-one review of what it is you're writing. And it also helps you figure out where you are in the process. And I think that's really important. Are you at step 1 or at step 8? And I think that's very, very important, because that professional viewpoint makes a big difference. At least it did for me.
Yeah. Thank you.
And then I had my book professionally edited before I submitted it, and that made a big difference too.
Right. Well, I mean, you were fun to work with, and I don't know if you really needed much guidance.
Oh no, I did.
You think? Okay.
Yeah.
If you say so. Let me just see if there's anything else I want to cover. What's going to happen next? What are you working on now?
Well, there's a couple things. I'm working on a sequel to Into the Room now. So my character Ben starts the steps to get his life in order. And in the second book, he needs to get it in order. And so in that book, I figured I needed a travel component. So I take him to the island of Iona in Scotland, which is a pilgrimage place for Christians. And he goes through steps there and does his thing. So I'm right now, my big focus is to finish that draft, because once the draft is done, the rest will go pretty quick. And I'm pretty sure the publisher, Elk Lake, will publish this book with me. And I hope so, because they're wonderful to work with, Elk Lake Publishing. And then the other thing I'm considering is on my blog. I haven't done a monthly now because I'm trying to write the book, but I do like a monthly blog post where I just do silly observations about life. Like, my favorite movie lines, or I have one called The Worst Proposal Ever, because my poor wife got the worst proposal in the history of the world. So I'm actually it was awful, but I'm actually thinking about,
Well, it must have worked.
well, I mean, the marriage has been good, but the proposal was a disaster. I was so nervous. She thought I was breaking up with her. I mean, that's how bad it was. And,
so it's only up from there, right?
And to know how wonderful a person my wife is, when she thought I was breaking up with her when I was proposing, she reached out and held my hand. So yeah, that's my wife in a nutshell. So I overmarried, or whatever, outran my coverage, however you put it. And but the other thing I'm considering, which I'm going to work on, I think, after I get done with the draft of the book, is doing a short podcast once a week or once a month where I read those columns, and just to have that presence. And so my son-in-law is pushing me to do that, and he's very good at this stuff. So I think I'm going to follow his advice.
Wow.
And then I'm just going to keep writing. I've got at least 2 other books in my head, and so I'll keep writing. I mean, I'm in this genre now. I think it's probably not time to switch genres, but I'm in this genre.
Yeah. I can tell you're having a good time.
Oh yeah, time of my life.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you for taking the time to talk with me today, and I'm looking forward to keeping in touch. Anything else you want to add before we?
I would, people that wonder about things like what I did, the complete switch. I mean, that's a complete switch, accountant to author. It doesn't hurt, just try. And you don't have to be published to be a writer. And I think it's an incredibly fun thing. And people say it's lonely. It's not lonely if you're writing fiction, because you're running around with characters all day. It is isolated. I mean, you can't do it with 15 other people around, but it's not lonely, and it's a lot of fun. And I would recommend people give it. And if they want to talk about it, email me or message me through my website.
And does personality type have anything to do with that? Are you seem well, I'm never very good at judging, or assessing, this, but you seem extroverted. Are you an extrovert, an introvert, shy? How would you describe yourself?
On the scale, whenever I've taken those tests, and if this side is completely introverted, this side is completely extroverted, and then there's the middle, I'm just over the line into extroverted.
Okay.
So I'm not as extroverted as people think I am, which basically means I have to recharge at home. Mm-hmm. I know people that they recharge being in crowds of 50 people. That's not me. But I am I'm like a dog with a bone when I set a goal. That's really probably the biggest thing about my personality that leads me through these various phases of life. Is when I set a goal, I just keep working towards it.
Yeah. And you're getting there. It's working.
And it's so much fun. It really is.
This is I'm John DeDakis. You've been one-to-one with Stephen Rogers. And Steve, this has been a lot of fun, and I hope we can do it again sometime, and good luck with the next book.
Well, thank you. And thanks for having me. And for the people that are watching or listening, thank you very much.